Good morning. I feel like I need more coffee today.
Yeah, I feel like that all the time.
Slide in here. There you go. Cool. Well, people are signing on now. Great.
Bowie's fired up and doesn't need any more coffee.
Yeah, don't know if you guys can hear the weird dog sounds happening.
Oh, here she comes.
Oh gosh. Give me that. Thank you. She has like 3 other toys on the ground. She can just not play with the squeaky one. That drives me absolutely nuts. I'm putting a hard stop on squeaky toys. They're too annoying for me.
While on Zoom calls.
While just living life. Like I'm in the logs, like squeak, squeak, squeak. I'm like, oh my God. Cool. Well, we have a few questions to go over, not to get over. Maybe we will be getting over some of these topics. Thanks for everybody who we have a lot of questions now. Please don't stop sending questions. Some of these we have talked about. There are quite a few questions in here about breathing patterns, breath rate, and nose breathing this week. We have addressed that in a previous call, but we'll talk about it again today. Just because I think it's interesting to talk about. It's a topic that I really like, actually. I would encourage you guys, while you're drafting your questions in your mind and then writing them out in an email or on Facebook, wherever you're sending those, just check our previous calls. Because sometimes we have to wait a few weeks to answer a question, and if you need that answer now, often at this point we've done so many of these that those answers are already out there. Yes, Bowie. Well, we're doing something right now.
Bowie's so amped this morning.
Yeah. Well, she needs to go on a run, but she hurt her foot over the weekend at the
Playing
dog
too hard.
pound. Where was she? the dog kennel. That's
Spa.
it. The dog spa. Yeah.
We don't just send our dog to the pound.
Well, I feel like they don't have like a good play area at that dog kennel. It's like a concrete play area, and it's not really great for a dog that literally would just play all day if she could. Has no ability to determine when she's tired and needs a rest day.
No self-regulation.
None whatsoever. She would also eat like 20 pounds of dog food at once if she could. Very hungry. Cool. Anyways, check out those resources. They're out there. Those calls are pretty well labeled. There are a few just like random coaches corner ones, but if you look in the descriptions, it will tell you what we talked about. I'm not sure where to start today. Maybe this question's been on here for a few weeks. I've pushed it off because it's not winter and I don't want people to think about winter yet. It's fall. It's beautiful where we are. It's a bit chilly, but the trees are turning. And I know that for most of our runners, it's the same. And if we're thinking about winter right now, we're not out there enjoying the trails as much as we could be. We'll go into a winter-ish question.
Oh God,
yeah.
I'm not ready.
It's like mentally we have to prepare just to answer this question. The question is, there's a couple little parts to it. It snowed last night and it got me excited for winter. How much skiing can a runner do in winter? I just love to ski and I want to go every weekend. I've worked really hard to make improvements over the last 6 months running wise though, and I don't want to lose those gains. What's your advice?
I mean, you're not going to be able to ski every weekend and keep improving with running. Like that's not practical, unfortunately. Particularly because most athletes tend to do their long runs on the weekend. So that's where you're getting a pretty significant, like between 15-20% of your total volume, maybe on that Saturday long run. So if you're habitually missing 15 to 20% of your volume, that's kind of getting into territory of like, we're barely really even maintaining fitness. You know, if you want to go every other weekend or every few weekends, I think that's a much more practical way to try to balance those things. Or like maybe instead of, you know, dropping the Sunday run and going skiing that day, you know, I know everyone's like like how close they are to the hill and like what their, you know, what their tolerance for sitting in ski traffic is different. But you know, it's just like simply not possible to practically advance your running practice if you're spending every weekend only skiing. I think, you know, we've talked about it before. Like if you're able to get even a jog in like 40 minutes after a day on the ski hill, like that's awesome. Lifts close at like 3:30, 4. You know, strap on a headlamp. Yeah, strap on a headlamp and get, you know, maybe 40 minutes to an hour in. The caveat to that being that running on tired legs is like not as productive. So if you're able to run before you go skiing, that's additionally beneficial. And if you're able to only miss one day a week to ski, that's great. Also, skiing is not a rest day. So don't do that.
Yeah, skiing is not rest. I love you guys who want to go and do some skiing on your rest day, but that can really affect your run quality in the days after. So you should be careful with that.
Remember that rest is training. So like when you miss a rest day, you're not adding something in, you're actually taking the most productive day of your training out.
You're leaving the one day that you have for adaptations. You're taking it away. Yeah, Kylie, what are your thoughts on kind of you? I know personally you're not really a skier. Zoe's not really a skier either, but
that's why she's my ski partner.
But you guys like go out and ski uphill and do some like, I would say more fitness and like just get outside and have like friend time skis. Like, how do you fit that into your training? What's your opinion on using the ski like cross train modality in winter?
Yeah, I kind of think it depends on the level of athlete too. Some of my athletes don't even do their long runs on the traditional like weekend as well. So keeping that in mind, but I think a lot of people I work with have one cross train day a week, and that could be a good time to maybe incorporate some skiing in there. I agree though, like 2 days in a row of like downhill skiing is not going to do a lot for your running. But then consideration too of getting into ski mountaineering and like doing a little bit of that as a way to get in some downhill, but then also just build a little bit of fitness. I think it's important though, if you're going to do that, to make sure you like let your coach know, so getting in a run first, and then so prioritizing your run, and then kind of what Zoe was saying, like you could do a little bit of skiing and running on a day. I have with athletes that want to do that, or even with Nordic skiing, I will kind of, if they let me know they want to do that, I'll kind of try and like guide them on when the best days to maybe do that are. Because you don't really want, I would say you wouldn't really want to be doing that the day before an interval, like a high intensity session, or the day before your long run, because it's going to require more energy output and it's going to make you more tired. So you're not going to get as much out of those key runs for the week.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
As someone who was like always late to meeting up with Kylie because I was getting my run in, I can say I fully live out this value.
Yeah. I think, something that you mentioned, Kylie, which is really important, is kind of athlete experience level. And where is each individual athlete at in their kind of training journey when you make the consideration of like, okay, how much like uphill skiing? And I really try not to. Downhill skiing is great. Again, it has almost no aerobic benefit to it. You've got all that gravity going downhill. You're not going to really get fitter doing it. So when I think about these things, I think about them really in terms of like uphill skiing, what's known as skimo or ski mountaineering, where you're actually using human power to get up the mountain, and it's requiring quite a bit of fitness, and it's really great for building your aerobic base. For me, it's really talking with the individual athlete, and making sure that, like, if you're an athlete who hasn't trained with the coach for a full year, if you don't have that, that kind of background of working on your economy and consistent running. Consistent running is like, it's great. You put a few months in, maybe you've got 6 months under your belt. Awesome. But that, in the context of a running life is really a small number. And we're looking at things in years, and that's how you make progress. Months are great because months add up to years, but years are where the real progress happens. So if you're an athlete who, maybe started with us like late, like in the spring or in the summer, and then winter comes around and you really want to ski every single weekend, we're going to have to look at your training schedule and try to fit in 4 or 5 runs in a much smaller window. Because if you lose out on that 5th run a week, most weeks in the winter, your consistency goes down quite a bit. So then you're not able to build the neural pathways that allow you to run more efficiently. You're also missing out on a little bit of aerobic development during that time. You're missing out on musculoskeletal adaptation. So that's like really becoming like a stronger, more resilient runner, like more resilient to the impact forces in running. And winter is a really, really important time to develop all of those things, because when you have that like 3 or 4 months of winter running adaptation, then you have a really nice foundation to then apply, spring races to, or summer races and adventures. And without that, you're missing out on literally hundreds, if not thousands, depending on the runner, thousands of miles of runs across, 3 to 4 to 5 months, depending on where you live. I mean, winter here seems to last, forever. So I really think that, if you're that athlete who is pretty new to Microcosm, you're going to be encouraged to run a lot more often than you're going to be encouraged to ski. And if you've got like a day where you go out, you want to ski with your family, you spend like 6 hours on the mountain, for that kind of athlete to stay consistent, 20 minutes on the treadmill after, quick jog just around town, even if the legs are heavy, it can be really important. And you focus on light, quick strides, minimal ground contact time, trying to keep things moving and feeling light. That way you're reinforcing some of the stuff that you worked on during the training week, and you don't leave it all behind. Now, for athletes who have been doing this a little bit longer, you have some more flexibility. And so, because those neural pathways, they're well developed. So if you decide that 1 week you're only going to run 3 days because you skied 3 other days, that you've got a little bit more leeway there. And sometimes I do that in my own training. But I sacrificed many years on the front end of really reducing the amount of time that I was skiing in order to build those neural pathways so that my efficiency wouldn't be affected. And like really key days during the winter that I don't miss, or I work with my coach to rearrange when I have like a big ski mountaineering project, or I'm working on a film project like I did last winter. All sorts of things that I have, personal projects that I have going on in the winter, can sometimes get in the way of my running. I always make sure that I get my workout in, because winter is a key time to develop speed. I always make sure that I get my long run in. So I have a run of like 2 hours plus every week, to help reinforce some of that aerobic side. And I generally don't do downhill skiing too much anymore. So there's always an uphill component. So there's always an aerobic component, which helps to build fitness. And that contributes to the overall picture of getting fitter and being stronger. That way, when spring and summer comes around and the mountains melt out, I'm ready to run. And usually some of my best running is often in the spring. So yeah, I hope that made sense to you guys and doesn't seem like an inflexible approach. It's just, you have to put the work in the front end in order to allow yourself more flexibility later. Think about it as a time investment that pays off later on in the end. And you see that all the time with running too. Athletes who kind of sometimes spend a little bit too much time comparing to what other people are doing on Strava. Oh, why are they constantly adventuring? Why are they constantly doing X, Y, and Z? Well, they've invested a lot on the front end to be able to have some of that flexibility later because they've already made a lot of adaptations. So that way they can go and do those things and it doesn't affect the greater training picture. Does that make sense to you, Zoe?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I don't know if you or Kylie want to add anything to that.
No, I think, like it's not that we're inflexible. It's just that the human physiology isn't as flexible as maybe it would be fun to have it be.
Yeah.
Like I wish I could bend the laws of physics and make downhill skiing really good for running, but I cannot.
Totally. And I think it's important to note that, if you really love uphill skiing, that is a completely different discipline, and you have to build efficiency. You have to build the neural pathways in that discipline in order to be good at it, to be strong, to feel comfortable and confident. So trying to adapt to two different disciplines at once can be really problematic. So I'm trying to adapt to running today, and then this afternoon I'm trying to adapt to uphill skiing and backcountry skiing or whatever it is. That's problematic. It can be really difficult to adapt to two different things at once. So you have to also adjust your expectations. We live in a valley of uphill skiers and runners, and I see a lot of runners overemphasize uphill skiing for fitness in the winter, and then really suffer at long ultras in the summer as a result of that. It's great to have the fitness, but if you're not an efficient runner, eventually the wheels just come straight off.
Yeah, I think particularly people who are newer to running, they think, oh, it's so simple. It's just it's all about who's the fittest. And it's not. Running is actually a very specific sport. It just looks general to people who don't understand it. And if you're going into ultras just being like, oh, well, I've spent a lot of time on the bike, I'm very fit, then you're not going to have a ton of success. Even so, we raced Ryan Hall, the famous marathoner at the Grand Traverse, and I beat him because he hadn't been doing a lot of running training. Probably the only time I'll beat a male Olympian in a race, but that just goes to show, in no world would I ever claim to be fitter than Ryan Hall. I am not, I can do 10 push-ups max and it's on my knees and I don't love it. He's fitter than me, but winning ultras isn't about who's the fittest. It's about training specifically for that event and respecting that. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are newer to running generally don't understand, because they just think oh, I can jump rope and that'll make me fitter, or I'll spend a lot of time on the bike and that'll make me fitter. And actually what it reminds me of is Jason Koop was doing a I'm bored, stuck in traffic kind of Q&A on his Instagram a few days ago. And someone asked him what the best cross training for ultra running was. And I loved his answer because it was just rest. People tend to really overemphasize trying to get fitter to the detriment of actually emphasizing the specific skills you need to succeed in running. And that's because I think we have a cultural misconception that running is something that you do to get in shape, rather than an actual discipline in and of itself.
Yeah, gosh. Coop, I really love that.
Yeah.
I think he hit it. Sometimes he doesn't. This time he really did. It's just so true. And I think that when you look at this in terms of if you're that athlete who's really committed, you're putting a lot of time into your running. I see everybody on this call is a committed runner, right? You guys wouldn't be here listening to us at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning.
If they weren't pretty all in.
During your work days, if you weren't already invested in this process, thinking about things in terms of improving over months and years and adding all of that up to create something awesome. So it's yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit there because my dog is just completely annoying. But yeah, I think it's important to also contextualize will the cross training help me mentally too? Something that is important to me because I have a ski background and I value time in the mountains, especially in the winter, is to think about if I'm going to sacrifice some running this week, what is that going to contribute for me long term? And so sometimes that can be, switching things up, and that's going to lead to how do I put this? A less likely outcome of being burned out. If we're constantly grinding, constantly running, and not mixing things up, sometimes things get stale, especially in winter. And so I think like if you've got like an adventure you want to do, if you want to go skiing on a weekend, let's not think about it as maybe cross training necessarily. Let's think about it more from this like standpoint of like, this is burnout prevention. This is like having fun, keeping things fresh. I'm going to communicate it with my coach. That way we can reorient the training around it. So I don't lose out on the running adaptations, but I do get to spend some time doing something else that I really enjoy. Doris mentions that, downhill skiing, it can be strenuous. Tele skiing, like that's a really tough discipline. Kudos to you for being a tele skier. Definitely something that I've always admired, but never had the courage to do myself.
Never had the quads to do.
I mean, that can be, strenuous. And it's like exactly why, like, if you do that the day before a workout, your workout might not feel as maybe as smooth or as high quality as it could. So you should pick and choose those moments, work with your coach. My personal plan in the winter generally looks like Monday rest, Tuesday easy run, Wednesday workout, Thursday easy run and or skiing, Friday easy run and or skiing, Saturday long run, Sunday easy run and or skiing. So I have 3 flex days every week, but I've been training for like 5 years to get to that place and running through 4 winters at least now. So it's, you take some time and then you have that flexibility. And so like what happens for me is I generally ski once or twice a week in the winter, and I almost always get 5 runs in unless I'm traveling to make a ski film or something, which happens only a few times.
I mean, that's fine. Like it's one off. Like if you're going on a week-long ski trip, like awesome. Like usually for someone, I'll schedule just like fun jogs, like really chill for time things. But we don't need you to like never go on vacation because you can't get runs in. What we need is for you to not trick yourself into thinking that downhill skiing every weekend is like going to help you be successful at a March Ultra in Moab. Please do not do that.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we've really nailed this question. I hope, if anybody has follow-ups, you know how to reach us. We're happy to readdress some of these topics and get more specific with them. In the future. Let's see. How do you maintain altitude benefits at sea level?
How long?
Oh,
because if the question is how, the answer is you do not.
That's what exactly.
Easy
how
answer.
long do you maintain altitude benefits at sea level?
Approximately 2 weeks before your blood cell count kind of returns to baseline.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple question. I think this is something that kind of is maybe a little bit over emphasized, especially with runners who are a little new to the sport.
Actually, a study that was in an Alex Hutchinson book that we read a while back that I thought was really interesting was looking at, and this was a study on like everything. It's like elite male race walkers in Australia. So it's like an imperfect, but anyway, the more highly trained you are, like the more elite you are, the more you'll actually feel like when you look at the actual metrics of performance. Like if you take an amateur race walker and an elite race walker and you move them like 3,000 feet up in altitude, the elite runners or the elite race walkers performance is going to they're going to experience a higher percentage of performance decline than an amateur, which is interesting.
And I think that those percentages, right, are like fairly significant. Because they end up taking away the a larger chunk of the athlete's like capacity.
Yeah, but also I just find that like interesting. It's not super necessarily like the most relevant thing for our team because that's like that would be at the level of like me versus someone running like a 220 marathon. And what we would have very different physiologies.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing that really kind of stands, this question is interesting to me because I tend to really enjoy running at sea level after having spent, you know, all my whole life basically at altitude for the last 12 years. And it's a nice break. I find that, you know, sometimes even over the weekend, for example, we went to Vermont and my HRV was really low for like the last two weeks and I've been injured. And as soon as I got down to sea level, it went right back up to pretty good numbers for me for of late. And that was just purely because there was more oxygen. I think I was able to actually recover. And that made me realize like, I'm not really recovering that well up here right now. But I think that the important thing really is to note, like, what's the difference between coming from sea level and going to altitude? And Bowie, gosh, go away. And for every 3,000 feet that you go like up from your baseline elevation, so we're at like 6,200 here. And if I was to do a race at 9,200, I would feel a significant difference in my ability to perform. And so for every 3,000 feet you go up from baseline, you're going to feel a difference unless you spent time adapting and training. And that is really going to be different for each athlete. This is something that, you know, I've seen quite a few times. I had an athlete who ran Broken Arrow I think it was last weekend, and she didn't have the opportunity to train at altitude at all before Broken Arrow. She went from sea level up to, you know, whatever Squaw Valley is at 7,000 feet.
Now named Palisade Tahoe.
Palisade Tahoe is at 7,000 feet. And that is like a significant difference if you're going from living at, you know, sea level in California, going up, you know, 2 times your elevation, if not more. And so, you know, she's really struggled with the altitude. And the only way to like really get better at that is one, increase fitness over time, increase blood volume through some heat adaptation, and also try to get up as many times as you can before the race to altitude to do training runs. And that can help to build adaptation, blood volume, so you're feeling like more confident. And I think personally for me, I've noticed that this is non-scientific, this is only anecdotal about me, but I think it takes at least 6 weekends at altitude. And so that would be, for me, that would be running at like 9 or 10,000 feet, like around 3,000 feet more than where I live now, to feel like I'm starting to make some adaptations and I'm able to take in enough oxygen and to feel like my breath rate is normalizing. You tend to like feel better faster. So it's like really individual.
It's like partially it is like genetically determined. Like there's a lot of factors that go into it. Fitness level obviously helps. Hydration status helps. Like making sure that you've had sufficient calories helps. Like it's you know, it's obviously very complicated. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like you could stress out about the fact that maybe you haven't won the like altitude genetic lottery, or you could just be like, it is what it is. You know, and like probably not overthinking things is helpful too.
Sure.
But yeah, like, you know, if you live at altitude, then you go to sea level, basically. And it, again, like it's kind of going to be like the curve of decline is going to be different for everyone. But like it, you know, it's kind of after like a week, your performance is going to kind of not necessarily fall off a cliff because it'll probably still be good, but you're going to really like it's not just like a consistent downward curve. When you look at like how most performance like decreases look, it's like, oh, feel pretty good. Like, oh man, really not getting a lot of benefits. It's like a wave.
Kylie, you were just running in the Pacific Northwest. What did you notice kind of about going out there and training after being, you know, 6,000 feet higher and probably adapted to much higher? You've done a lot of adventures this summer. What did you feel?
Yeah, kind of the same as you. It was crazy how I felt like I could do more volume. And I will say, I felt like there was like a loss of maybe power in my legs because you have all this oxygen and you like maybe can go, you feel like you can go a little bit faster, but your muscles are not adapted to that. And so that is one thing. And when I used to live over there in Crested Butte, living at 9,500 feet versus in Carbondale where we're at like 6,000 feet, the one big noticeable difference there was like I couldn't keep on muscle mass. And so it's really, really hard to kind of maintain that as well. And then yeah, it was just amazing how much better I felt recovery wise. And then like I didn't have as many like little niggles and things as well. So I like wasn't as sore. But yeah, so on to your point, I felt like I'm like, maybe I need to recover a little bit better at altitude. Just on a side note, you know, from a scientific perspective, I've seen it can actually take like up to 3 to 4 weeks just to fully adapt to altitude. So if somebody is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like go for 2 days and adapt to altitude, you know, typically that's not gonna be the best strategy.
Yeah, I'd be like, sure, whatever you need to tell yourself you're ready for hard rock after coming from Florida.
Yeah, there's some really great writing in the Jack Daniels book about like altitude protocol. And I know even for us, it's just not, and we always strategize about how to work away from home and get time up high. And we never pull the trigger on anything except for the weekend adventures. But yes, like what is most effective is really doing a boot camp of at least 1 week up high, and then returning back to your normal sleeping levels for at least a week in order to recover, and then repeating that process. And I think one of the reasons why it takes me at least 6 weekends, 6 weekends, there's 2 days in a weekend, that's 12 days, that's still less than 2 weeks, is it just takes that much kind of time at elevation to like start to make those adaptations. And another thing that I think is really important is sometimes that expectation when we go down to sea level, we're supposed to feel like superstars. I often don't have, that actually doesn't really normally happen for me. I think kind of what Kylee said, you feel like you can sustain an effort for longer. But there is, the side effects of that, like the muscle fatigue, the impact forces. If you're not used to running that fast for that long, your muscles aren't going to be used to that, and they're going to have trouble absorbing those impact forces, and you might recover well. But that can also kind of determine how long you want to run those efforts for. And another thing that is really interesting to me is too, when you go down, at least for us, when we go down to sea level, it tends to be to a much more humid environment. And so for me, I find that my best runs are never the first few days at sea level. They're always around 7 to 10 days out from being at sea level, is where I really start to feel like I'm like my muscles are adapting, like I can understand like the effort level, what it's going to feel like, and I'm working better with that thicker air. This is like something that's really interesting. Like the 2 times we've done Athens, which is a great race in Arkansas, a very difficult marathon. The first time I went down there, I didn't feel like I got anything out of coming from like adapted to 10,000 feet, all the way down to sea level. Athens is at like 600 feet, and I didn't feel great at all. I felt like it was a very difficult race. And the next year I went out to just a few days before, like a few days earlier. So I had a bigger window to get used to the conditions in that environment. And as a result of that, and I was able to get in a long run in that environment, in those conditions. And then I really rocked that race because I didn't like, I felt like the adaptations were then there for me, rather they were kind of like not working for me that first time. And
Yeah.
I think if you ever have the opportunity, if you're somebody who lives at altitude, getting down to sea level once in a while, spending a bit of time down there, 7 to 10 days, if you can, you're going to be able to feel faster. You're going to feel better. You're going to recover better. There can be some huge benefits to that. And then going back to altitude to continue your training. We see this a lot.
To address Robbie's question, he asks, is there a minimum elevation where those impacts are more drastic? Like, would you struggle at all going from 1,000 to 4,000 versus 5,000 to 8,000? So that's a really interesting question. And looking at it, like the percentage of oxygen in the air, like decreases drastically, like the higher you go. So like the jump from 1 to 3 is much less pronounced than even, like 8 to 12. So like, even if you live at 8,000 feet and then you compete at like 11,000 feet, that's going to be much more difficult for that person living at 9,000 feet compared to that person living at 1,000 feet competing at 4,000 feet.
Yeah, a lot less.
Just because the percentage of oxygen goes down.
Totally.
It's not the same percentage, like 10% less, 10% less, 10% less. So.
Oh gosh. That's always reminds me of like doing the first 14er of the season, here at 6,000 and going up to like like when you finally peak at 14,000 feet, I'm like, man, I'm having trouble breathing up here. This is rough.
Yeah. I like always I always have like my first like alpine long run of the season is always in like late May, early June. It's always like near Leadville or BV. I get super psyched on some mission. Oh, yeah. And it's always like way too snowy to be safe even or fun. And then I remember that like 9,000 feet really super sucks when you've like only been chilling at 6,000 feet. And also maybe you haven't been doing mountain legs as consistently as you should.
When I went to Nepal, it was like really crazy. The difference between like we were acclimatizing at 15,000 feet and going up to 21, and it was insane like how terrible you feel at that altitude. And I was in shape and I was like, we were doing a summit of something and I was trying to push, and your legs just like feel like they're lead, like you're just like picking one foot after the other. It's really nuts. Going up to that kind of altitude is another experience in itself.
Totally. And even like when you're adapted to like, Carbondale or whatever, or like the mountains around here, you think that's pretty high. Just try it at 6,000 meters.
Yeah, like what Kathmandu is like. It's like at 13,000 feet, something crazy.
I don't like it.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah, seriously. Well, cool. I think, I don't know. I hope that made sense. I can't remember who asked this question. But yes, give yourself a few days to get used to being back at sea level and then enjoy the benefits of all that altitude training. You will have it. I think it takes a few days to adjust to the specific environment where you are. So manage those expectations accordingly. And something that, that always is, I feel like is important when we think about like altitude and getting up high. It's like, how are we breathing out there? What's our breath rate? And so we've got a couple questions about breathing, which I think are just super, super important. The first one is about nose breathing, which, I love nose breathing, just not when I'm running. Here's the question. It goes like this. I have a question about nose breathing versus mouth breathing. The internet has a lot to say about the benefits or otherwise of one versus the other versus both when running. And I feel as though the reference studies I've seen are tiny, like 10 people. I'm wondering if you all had an opinion on whether this makes any difference to performance. I'm a running mouth breather because I think I have a tiny nose and can't get enough oxygen in. But this is especially true when it's cold. Is there any benefit to trying to change what comes naturally, or should I stick with my own style breathing? I love this question.
I love
We
this
have
question because
breathing runners.
infamously the internet is correct about everything.
Well, Google is a great resource. Yeah.
Like you
Zoe,
can
what do you
find,
think about?
like you can literally go on the internet and it says like Ted Cruz is the Zodiac killer. So just anything you see out there, you know, not a thing.
When you Google nose breathing for runners, which I did this morning, the first thing that pops up out of 2 million
It's someone that has like excellent SEO, you know?
Right. It says focused and rhythmic breathing is the best way to oxygenate the body during a run to reach a boosted performance.
That's like not even a sentence.
Begin by pacing yourself and inhale through the nose for 2 counts, followed by an exhale for 2 counts. This ensures a steady breathing rate. Okay. So if you were to have done this same Google search that I did, you would have gotten some interesting information. One is that this doesn't really mention nose breathing. It just says focused and rhythmic breathing is the best way to oxygenate the body. Okay. Great. That is 100% correct.
That is correct, but your body does that on its own.
Well, yes.
If you have arrhythmic breathing, that is a medical condition. You know, like if you're out there, yeah, that's like that. Yes. If you're out there breathing arrhythmically, yeah, I don't know. Like, don't read shit on the internet. I say as someone who's going to post this on the internet later without even a fact check.
I do think that it's important to kind of find a breathing pattern that works best for you. We also have a question about breathing patterns, so maybe these will be kind of the same answer. Yeah, it should be rhythmic. Whether you're inhaling through the nose or the mouth, I think, you know, honestly, focusing on nose breathing, not that effective. What we find is that actually you can get in a lot more oxygen through your mouth. If you're not doing that conversational effort test, 3 to 4 sentences conversational, being that weirdo who's talking out loud to themselves while running down the trail, just embrace it, sing a song, whatever it is. That's how you check in to see if you're running easy. That's the first place to start. You know, nose breathing, you're gonna get in a little bit less oxygen. I think you're going to be too focused on that kind of, at least it doesn't come natural to me to breathe in through my nose while exercising. So that takes a lot of my focus away from like the actual strides and how my run feels. I tend to run a little bit slower when I'm inhaling through my nose, like more like 6-sentence conversational or something. More of a plod than a run. And we really want to keep those runs like light and quick on the feet and things like that. So we don't have to go that slow unless you're trying to get like a true recovery effort or something like that. So yeah, author of this question, you're awesome. Stick to what works best for you. If it's a nose breathing style, awesome. If it's mouth breathing, awesome. I'm breathing through my mouth out there.
Me too. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. When I go up the stairs in our house, I start mouth breathing. Like I don't know. I feel like there's like this, like occasionally I'll have athletes like, no, I'm a nose breather. And I'm like, that's amazing. Congratulations on having like, you know, like tunnel nostrils, like so great for you. And it's just, it doesn't make you fitter. And there's no scientifically proven like huge performance benefits. And it's just something that the internet has a lot to say about, because like there's nothing the internet loves more than like poorly researched, like blown out of proportion, like kind of studies that, you know, are kind of like this biohacky, like if you drink chaga and breathe through your nose, you'll be able to get into ketogenesis easier. And it's just like, that's like catnip for, you know, dudes on running Twitter. And I would just be very cautious of getting really excited about anything that the internet is excited about, because like,
yeah, those
you know, what does most research show? Like that the way that you naturally breathe is the way that is best for you to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah, I have quite a bit to talk about when it comes to breathing patterns. And the one thing that's really important to note is that when effort level goes up, your breath rate generally also increases. So without going into too many details yet, just think about running your strides, maybe 1 or 2 minute interval nose breathing, how difficult that might be. You'd have to be breathing in through your nose quite rapidly, exhaling through your mouth really quickly. And I think you'd probably be pretty uncomfortable. It'd be pretty tough to get in the oxygen that you need to fuel kind of that higher intensity effort. So be careful with that. You know, if you are nose breathing when you're out, you know, running your easy conversational efforts, cool, that's great. If that's comfortable for you, but be able to switch into a style of breathing that draws in more oxygen and gets out more carbon as soon as that effort level increases. I think especially if you're racing or doing workouts. Kylie, what are your thoughts on nose breathing? Are you a nose breather?
No, and it's definitely not my area of like expertise or anything. I feel like I have, you know, with the thoughts on breathing pattern, I've personally been working on that a little bit in my own life, just trying to expand like the rib cage and get into a better breathing pattern. I've been working with a strength training coach that's actually having me do breathing exercises to help with like alignment of the body, which I had never done in the past and never really thought of, but it's made like a huge difference in my ability to overcome some injury stuff, and also just kind of feel like I'm getting more oxygen in. So again, I'm not an expert in this area. It sounds like TJ has more experience than both of us, Zoe and I. So I would love to hear just more about your thoughts on the breathing pattern, TJ.
Yeah, I think, you know, I always find it interesting when people want to breathe through their nose while they're exercising, because as a meditator, a lifelong meditator, I'm very familiar with the breath as a vehicle for relaxation, and running isn't very relaxing to me. Running is very engaging. And so when I think about breathing through your nose and exhaling through your mouth, yes, it's rhythmic. Yes, we're trying to get into a particular pattern and then maintain that rate. But I'm thinking about like lying down on my bed with my eyes closed, looking for a very relaxed, kind of peaceful and meditative state. When I'm out running, I'm thinking about breath rate in a completely different way. We're thinking about, you know, what is the most efficient way to bring oxygen in, get carbon out, make sure those waste products are getting out through the breath, so I can sustain my effort. And there are several different breathing patterns that you can use. What is well studied, and most elite athletes, male and female, are doing a 2-to-2 breath rate. And this is like at probably aerobic threshold or higher. So like as your effort is increasing, but you're not at like impossibly hard effort levels. So think about it as like your race pace, probably for most people. And so what that means, 2-to-2, is that for every right foot strike and every left foot strike, 1, 2, you take in an inhalation of air through your mouth. And for each, then the following right foot, left foot strike, you exhale between those two strides. And that tends to be a good balance of getting air in and getting air out in an efficient way, because we use energy when we breathe. So if our breath rate is more elevated than that, we may be drawing in more air than we're able to get out. And we see this when athletes like side stitch a lot and things like that. You tend to be drawing in a lot of air, but not getting any out. And that's a big issue, especially in long races, especially in fast, intense races, because that cramping that can occur when you can't get a full exhalation out can be debilitating. I've like succumbed to this many times in my own training and racing, and it's awful. So what I tell athletes is like, think about like on your easy runs, maybe like 4-to-4 ratio. You don't have to like overthink it. But think about like taking 4, like right, left. And in that kind of those 4 steps, you are taking in a breath of air. And then as you exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're exhaling out a breath of air. And that's really long, deep breathing. For me and for people who meditate, that's going to be your closest to like very relaxed, meditative running, easy running. As you start to get faster, that breath rate increases because the oxygen demand goes up. When you're late stages of a race, you might be breathing like 2-to-1. And things like that, where you're taking in 1 breath for your first 2 strikes and then exhaling on the 3rd strike. And that's totally normal too. You can experiment with these things when you're out on your runs. And this is something that I've done. Sounds like Kylee might be experimenting a little bit with this stuff, but spend like 2 minutes trying like 4-to-4 breath rate or 3-to-3. Increase your effort a little bit, maybe see where you're at. If you're, for me, particularly important downhill running, because you lose a lot of aerobic benefit when you're running downhill. And in Colorado, where we live, in the races that we do, often the downhills are several miles long. So it's like very sustained downhilling, where I tend to like not be breathing at all because it's so easy to run downhill. And that's where I get into trouble with cramping, because I don't take enough of an exhalation. So, experiment with these things, become aware of it over time and through practice. I think like the best way to do that really is to just get out on an easy run and practice like, 4-to-4 breathing or 3-to-3 breathing. I posted an article by Jack Daniels, who is an amazing coach and exercise scientist, that really explains these breath rates like really, really well. What he's finding is like the most rhythmic way to breathe. 80% of runners are breathing at a 2-to-2 rate. Some are using 3-to-3, and like the faster you go, it's like 2-to-1 or 1-to-2. And I wouldn't like necessarily overemphasize like exactly what rate you're doing, but think about like what feels comfortable and try to stay in a rhythmic pattern, especially as your effort level increases. If you're holding in your breath and not exhaling, that can be problematic. Also, something that I like to do, the harder my effort is, I'll breathe in through my nose and in through my mouth at the same time to get more oxygen in. And it's something that everybody can practice. Breathe through as many places in your body as you can. Get that oxygen in. It helps.
Use those orifices.
Just make sure you're getting a good exhalation too, especially kind of as your rate of exertion continues to climb. If you're doing that like tempo workout and you're in the last 5 minutes and things are starting to feel really tough and you're drawing in these big gasping breaths, but you're not also exhaling, that might lead to some cramping. So you really want to be careful with that. And build awareness around your breath through meditation. This is something that is scientifically backed. Everybody on this call, you should be meditating 10 minutes a day. It's not that hard to find 10 minutes in your day to work on your breath. I think it's really cool, Kylee, that you're working on that. Something that I've also worked on a lot as an athlete is getting my ribs, my abdomen to be looser so I can draw in more air, so I can get more.
You have a very loose abdomen.
Yeah, I don't. I'm so tight. I need to like really train kind of my that diaphragmatic area of the body to be able to expand, so I can get in all the air. Like I can draw in really huge breaths, but I am so tight that I don't have the ability, like I can't store it anywhere. So it's problematic. That can lead to cramping. And cramping is a huge issue for me on most of my long runs and things like that, and in my racing. So yeah, practice those things. I think a good way to do that, you can lie down and put your hands like near your diaphragm and try to breathe into your hands. And you should feel your hands kind of expand, and then you can move them to kind of different parts of your abdomen, your stomach, down low, and try to just work on building awareness and breathe into those spots. And it can take a few tries to like be able to use your mind to channel where that breath goes. But the more like area you have to expand your lungs, the more breath you're going to be able to take in. But remember, you have to be able to also exhale that out, or that can lead to cramping. Yeah.
And also don't overthink it.
Totally.
I've never once thought about my breathing, and I'm still alive, and I am a decent runner. So if like all of that to you was like, oh boy, kind of like how it is for me. And like I do breathing exercises like in daily life. Like this is something that is much more important to me, like just trying to like stay alive as a human and not like get like just like make sure that my breath stays under control, just walking around and like checking email. But then when I'm running, I've literally never once thought about it, and I am fine.
Yeah, I often do not, check in with how many breaths I'm taking per step out there. It is something that's important to be aware of. I think, especially if you're one of those athletes who does get side stitches and things like that. Or if you start to feel like you have a tendency to like hold your breath during the workday, you might also have a tendency to do that during your runs. Holding your breath by accident, building awareness around your breath, kind of like what you're doing by doing some breath work during the day, helps to continue to, deactivate your sympathetic nervous system. We want that parasympathetic nervous system to be activated as often as possible. That way you're feeling a lot more relaxed, much better for recovery and things like that.
Yeah. Don't overthink it, but be aware that breath is an important thing.
Yeah, and take a healthy approach to it. Exactly.
Healthy approach.
Don't obsess about it.
Yeah.
And if you like to breathe through your nose, I give
That is
you
awesome.
my stamp of approval. But just don't. I wouldn't.
I mean, like I have to wear
wouldn't
breathe
switch it
right
up.
strips to sleep. So like
A lot of people do.
not a performance mechanism for me.
Oh,
Like I feel like
gosh.
if it needs exterior scaffolding to just like help me sleep, like that's not the thing I want to rely on during a tempo.
Well, cool. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I don't know if that was more information or less information than the last time we talked about breathing. But yeah, I'd recommend that everybody meditates. I think that's super,
Blanket
super helpful.
recommendation.
Yep. And if that's the only response you get from me in your logs, that's because I really want you to meditate. Okay. Well, have a good weekend, guys. We got to get going, and I appreciate everybody being here. We'll see you all again next week.
Bye.
Bye.